Well, thank you, everybody. Welcome here to this live Q&A with Judy Fox. My name is Calder, and I am the community manager here at New Masters Academy. And I'm joined today by Judy Fox, who is a fantastic sculptor and instructor and artist and critic. And for those of you who may not be familiar with Judy's work, if you haven't seen her courses on our website at all or anything like that, Judy has a storied past. She's gone to Yale, got her pull it up here. BA in Studio Art at Yale, MFA in Art History and Conservation at NYU, has achieved things like the Guggenheim Fellowship, the American Academy of Arts and Letters Award, senior critic at New York Academy of Art, just tons of stuff here. Very, very storied background. Judy, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Thanks for being here. So, of course, today is all about your new courses here at New Masters Academy. We just released them in full. We actually broke it up into two parts, the ceramic portrait sculpture, where you worked on an armature bust and a pinch pot technique to get through to the final piece. And so for those of you who haven't checked it out yet, you can go check it out on our website and take those courses now. And today we're just going to talk all about you, Judy, and your background and sculpture and everything. So I hope you're ready because we've got tons of questions to dive into here.
All right, fire away.
All right, fantastic. Well, first of all, let's just start from the beginning. What first pulled you towards sculpture?
Well, I actually started sculpture at summer camp when I was 16. And yeah, and so it's not like when you're 16, you're not actually really making good sculpture, but it just, I remember starting to do it. It was an arty summer camp called Bucks Rock. And I started doing sculpture there in their sculpture shop, and all my neurons lined up and went into rhythm, and I was in my happy place. So after that, I just kept trying to do it. And I took sculpture then in college, almost every semester.
That's fantastic. It's always great when you find exactly what you know that you're meant to do early on, and you can just keep following it. So early on, what was hardest about learning about sculpture?
Well, I would say, I mean, there are two challenging things. The technical stuff for figurative sculpture is challenging, and you really have to learn it. And it can be taught, but it's a discipline. So that's hard in a kind of a normal way. What is even harder, though, is with figuration, which has a long tradition, and you have competitors that for 500 years, at least, if not 2,000 or 3,000. There's a pretty good sculpture that's 23,000 years old. Anyway, lots of competition throughout history. How in a contemporary world do you show your own voice? Do you figure out what you yourself are trying to say that can compete with all of that? And that really takes some sitting on a mountaintop and figuring it out.
Absolutely. Well, what was a turning point that changed your work for the better, do you think?
I really did sort of think about it. I went to graduate school not doing art for a while because I was in art history graduate school. At the time, in the late 70s, sculpture, the art world was not doing figure at all, and it was pretty derisively treated. So I knew I had to figure out a new way to do it that would be interesting to a contemporary audience. And I could not go to an art school and do figure. But interestingly, in art history school, they took figuration very seriously. And they took style of rendering of figures as a way to read the values of the society that emitted that figure and had effect on the artist. So that was a realization that came to me gradually. And then it was my task to just kind of figure out how I could represent my own feelings about life in this world through the way I rendered my figures.
Absolutely. And on that note, who are some of your biggest influences in figuring that sort of thing out?
So I would say a breakthrough would have been kind of late in this process, have been polychrome Gothic wood carvings and clay, which no one was really looking at. Figurative artists at the time were hung up on the 19th century and the Renaissance. And I found the Gothic figures to be very individualized, very quirky, not all idealized, not so idealized like the Renaissance. I found them to be very just sort of interesting altogether. And the painting just was its own thing. It was a new thing. So I eventually figured out how to paint figures and make them in a really individualized way.
That's awesome. I mean, I totally agree with your approach, and I love that you came from taking the Gothic or the idealized Renaissance stuff. I think we talk a lot about perfect proportions and all the sorts of stuff like that at New Masters Academy, but I think what you do and contemporizing it has worked out fantastically for you. So another question here: what do you wish you understood sooner about becoming an artist?
I don't think I had many illusions. I did, as an undergraduate, I started out pre-med, so that's how unillusioned I was. But I eventually dropped that. It was a little too much to do both. And so when I graduated, I knew that I had to figure out a way to make a living. So I did. I didn't just go to art history school. I went to art conservation school. And when I got out, I worked as a restorer. And that was my day job.
That's awesome. I love that. I love watching old like restoration videos on YouTube. It brings me joy and calms me down to see old work being restored. So it's very cool to see. That's awesome that you did that as a day job. I want to start jumping into more kind of specifics about sculpture in general, especially for students maybe watching this who've never tried it out before. So for a beginner, what's the simplest material setup that you'd recommend to get started without overbuying materials?
So really all you need is your clay, a turntable. You can get a Lazy Susan, and your tools. Oh, let me get you some tools. I'll show you.
We love a demo.
So these kind of loop tools are the best ones to begin with. You'll notice that they have teeth on them. You want to use the biggest tool that you can for whatever size you're making, because this flat part here is a good way to have a straight line. Everyone's trying to figure out how to not be lumpy. All you do is take your tool in the direction that you want it to be flat, and then it'll flatten for you. Here's a smaller one. These come in all sizes. And I personally let the clay go to leather hard, and then I carve with a toothed tool like this. So I would also recommend, for those of you who do not have a really endless budget to hire models, that you learn to use photographs. And you can learn to use photographs from my lesson actually has me working from photographs, doesn't it? So
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, that way you don't need to pay somebody $20 an hour and you can take as long as you want to work on your piece. So really that's all you need: a table, some tools, a turntable, and some photographs and clay. I don't know, I cannot recommend you a clay because I just lost my clay. It's not,
Oh
my
no.
clay is not being produced anymore, so I actually have to find a decent clay.
Oh, goodness.
But
Well,
I
what
use
wording
one
works
that
would
it
be
does not have grog in it. I use a smooth one because I carve.
gotcha. That was going to be my next question is what sort of clay do you prefer for portrait work? So that's answered. Thank you for that. Um, and obviously you've got those must-have tools that you just showed us. What are some common materials related mistakes that could cause cracks or weak spots, and how can students avoid those sorts of things?
I am not, like I said, I'm not a ceramicist, so I've been making do with spotty knowledge. So I think whether something cracks as it dries is dependent upon the clay. But, ceramicists have a whole spiel about, getting rid of air bubbles, and I personally am like the worst ceramicist. I have my things are built up really sloppily. Only they look neat on the outside, but the inside is a big mess, full of air holes. And my trick is that I fire really slowly. So if you belong to some commercial place that fires for you, they usually have their kiln packed. So they don't want you to know that if you just get all the moisture out of it by having it in the right below the boiling point for 24 hours, thus occupying the kiln for an entire day, which they don't want you to do. They don't tell you that. But if you're a slobby craftsman like I am, you just need to dry the clay out really slowly, and then very slowly start raising the temperature until you get to 1300 degrees or so, where the clay is melted, and you just want to rush it through it then. So that's the trick. Slow firing, something that's hard to do unless you have your own kiln.
Very true. Yeah, but that's definitely a good point and a great tip. So I appreciate that. We do have a live question here from one of our students who is here live on YouTube. You're asking, how important is the Renaissance tradition in your work?
So the Renaissance tradition is like half of it, because what I do is really strictly observe the subject, and I observe from all points of view, because I really like an individualized portrait. For example, I have a real antipathy towards the kind of eyeballs that people get taught in sculpture class, because everyone has the same upper lid. And I mean, I see the same eyes everywhere. But if you just observe the eyes the same as you would observe anything else, you can have interesting looking eyes instead of the same eyes as everybody else. So, but what's great about Renaissance work is the curvilinear resolution, how the composition is the composition of the outlines, and of course there are 1,000 outlines for each sculpture. That's all adjusted to have continuous curves that point to each other and that have a certain rhythm that gives the piece its own mood. So that's really the trick to Renaissance style work, and I use that in at the same time as I'm doing portrait stuff. So that's the entire. Now I've given you the whole trick to my work is observation, using physical idiosyncrasy with a idealistic curvilinear resolution approach. And
I think
I
that's a great
just
summation.
force those things to be in the same piece.
I love that, and you definitely explore that in the course at New Masters Academy. There's a lot of observation, a lot of refining. So we see you do that in your work immediately. So that's great. All right, so I want to jump ahead here. What does a productive studio day look like for you?
So I get to the studio probably, my day is probably 10 to 6, I would say. And depending upon the season, of course, winter is very depressing. This isn't it. I really prefer to work in daylight, which is what you see right here around is daylight. I'm in front of my studio windows. And usually have something, my projects are for the little ones. My little ones are weeks long and my big ones are months long. So I basically have a piece sitting on the table. When I come in, I take the plastic off of it and pick up my tools and start scritching for, 8 hours. Like, that's my day. So if you don't have like ADHD or whatever it is that makes you hyper focused, don't do my don't do my method, because I sit there like this hour upon hour.
Very meditative. Don't worry, I think that's going to resonate very well with our students. Well, on that note, how do you keep momentum when you're in the middle stage of a long piece?
So yeah, it's true that the first weeks are most exciting when you're just really putting it together. And I do have a I'll have a full, if it's not too big. My big pieces I have to work from the bottom up and fire in between. But for a piece that's small enough so that I can make the whole thing, that's done in like 2 weeks. And then months later, I'm done. So, and for me, it just takes me that long to get a sort of relaxed and special rhythm to them, because I have a very refined looking work. So you can get around all this time by keeping your surface rough, which is what most people do, because, like I said, very few people want to spend the hours making, and let me interrupt myself and say, you, you should never try and smooth out a piece on purpose. What you want to do is observe more closely and then and refine the piece. So my pieces are never smoothed. When you smooth something, you are erasing information. What you want to do is add information until it's just more closely resolved. So anyway, I forget what was the question? Have I answered the question?
Yeah, I was gonna say, how do you keep momentum when you're in the middle of a big piece?
Oh
And
yeah,
actually,
but
kind of,
it can be,
yeah,
towards the end, you're like, can I just get this? So on the end, it's like, it's what keeps you going is the standard. I have a certain standard that I have that I wanted to achieve. And when I look at it and it just sort of all sucks together and starts to glow, thank God I'm done. So
that's
yeah,
great.
you have to have something you know what the real answer is, you have to have a goal. You have to have something you're really aiming at so that you know when you've gotten there. And it doesn't have to be a very resolved piece like mine is, but you have to have something you want it to do. And as a beginning artist, you may not know how to achieve that exactly. So the thing that you do is you haul other people in front of your work and you say, what do you think? What do you think is of this? What do you think this piece is saying to you? And if they're getting it right, you're like, yes, and you continue. If not, you're like going, oh, maybe I should do something a little different.
That's a great piece of advice that actually kind of answers the next question I was going to ask, which was, when you're not sure what to do next, what's your go-to next step to regain clarity on that project? And I think you've already kind of explained, you got to have that goal, and then you got to show it to someone to see if you've reached that goal.
So I also, since I don't have anyone around anymore at this age, I'll make a little model, and I don't draw much, so I'll tend to just make a little clay model and work things out that way. Um, and I just tinker a lot in my head, in my imagination, till I get something that I think can be part of a show, actually, because I'm always aiming towards putting a show together, which means that the pieces have to kind of relate to each other in some interesting way.
Of course. And you making little models ahead of time. I mean, that's a great analog to thumbnailing for a drawing before you transfer to canvas. So I love
Yeah.
that, and I'm sure our students are very aware of that. So that's great. So how do you decide when to keep pushing versus when to stop and rest?
You mean physically?
Physically, or just on the piece in general? Like if you've been working for 6, 8 hours and you're not really getting anywhere.
Oh, I usually work too long until I'm exhausted and hungry because I'm not that self-aware when I'm working. So I
Yeah,
don't really have a
the
great
interoception
answer to
goes
that
away.
question. Or when your husband calls up and says, "You're late for lunch," then you're like, oh, then you stop.
That's a great time to stop. I agree. Well, what habits do you think matter most for building skills over the years?
I think, well, it depends. I mean, my skills, which are basically three-dimensional observation. Once once you get the skill, it starts to become very natural. Like I now know exactly. I hold up a photograph, I put my head in the right place. I look and I just have a certain way of working. It's a habit now. What once took me a while to do has become very direct. I guess it's like learning the piano and then suddenly being able to go up and down the chords and diddle. So it's the same thing. Learning any skill, you want to get it into your neurons and have it become a language for you.
I think that's a great answer. Yeah, no, I mean, consistency over time is the only thing that really builds skills, I think. And we teach that a lot here as well. So yeah, you got to burn it in until it becomes a muscle memory, and then you're good. Um, so for someone who might be new to sculpture, what are the first skills that they should build before worrying about things like details?
Oh, don't worry about the details at all. Just worry about uh, accuracy. I'm constantly harping on horizontals and verticals and where the outlines are aiming at. And then, well, I mean, way before details, you want to subdivide the volumes as a sculptor. I mean, that's the start. And then getting an agreement between your volumes and your outlines is going to take you enough time. Then a detail is just a smaller version of that. If you start sticking a detail on top of uh, a sort of vaguely understood larger outlines and volumes, that is going to give you an amateurish looking piece. That's like the definition of amateurs. You have not observed the form and then you stick a nose on it.
That's a great answer, and I think that's of course similar to drawing as well. People who are trying to work on figure, that's very similar advice, I think. So that's great. So what do you think are some of the most common mistakes that beginners make when they're approaching portrait sculpture?
Exactly what we were just talking about. It's getting obsessed with the details first. And I mean, it's sad because when I teach a lot of people, like they just get all excited about an eyebrow and the eyebrow is, halfway up the forehead. And so I have to just cut it off and, and have them start over, like you don't want to spend time on details until you've gotten the shapes right. That is that's the big dead end.
Gotcha. So what do you look for first when you're critiquing a student's work? An eyebrow halfway up the forehead?
I when I teach, I mean, because I'm talking about just teaching technique, that's different than going around to studios and looking at finished works of art or works of art in progress and talking about their ideas and what they're trying to say. That's a completely different thing. And in those under those circumstances, when someone has a strong idea of what kind of work they're trying to make, it's not always appropriate for them to have very refined modeling. But for a class, when I'm teaching refined modeling and I want them to be able to do it or not voluntarily and not do it just because they don't know how to, I just go around and make them, it's very simple. I go around, I make them stand in front on the other side of the piece in the model. I make them look at the outlines rather than working in the front. Like, you may even have some professors at the New Masters Academy who work like this. It's really fast, but it's a very good way to get a flat looking face and neglect all the stuff that's going on here, which is just as interesting formally. So I make them look at the outline and understand the way the outline itself travels in space and is not just an up and down thing, but goes backwards and comes forwards. So that is really what I do. And aside from just making sure they can develop a measuring eye to see proportion correctly.
Well, on that note, what do you think is the best way for students to train their eye to spot those proportion issues sooner?
I think that the best way is to hold up a vertical ruler and measure you can measure, you want to take a straight edge, hold it up so you can see what is sticking out the most from your point of view, from the specific point of view. And you can just use your other hand to see what the proportions are. You can actually look at it from afar and measure the proportions. I always say, never believe your instincts. Your instincts are full of prejudices. So if the nose looks too long for you, it may well be that your chin is too short, and it's not a nose problem at all. So you have to measure against everything. And this is a huge life lesson. When you look at things, you are really a prejudiced being, and you are not necessarily seeing what is actually true. You have to measure, take statistics to see what's really going on.
I love that. I think that's great advice for any artist. Absolutely. And I imagine for students who are trying to learn sculpture that could be a little bit overwhelming when they realize they're running up against their own personal prejudices, as you put it, versus what they're actually observing. When
And
students
wait,
feel
and
overwhelmed, yeah,
I'm going to make one more point. I consider all of that classical training to reinforce those personal prejudices. For example, the proportion of like having a 1:8 head to body, ridiculous. If you look at probably 70 or 80% of you have a much bigger head than that compared to your body, because you are not 6'5". So a lot of those proportions are just academic proportions, and they reflect classical Greek and 19th century tastes. So, and especially if you are not, well, I was going to say, if you're not a white person, you should be interested in other proportions. But although in truth, those proportions are probably more true for Africans, who tend to be taller and have smaller heads. But what I'm saying is, think in a fresh way about what you're seeing with an open mind, and observe to get your own personal and cultural take on stuff.
absolutely agree. And if students are feeling overwhelmed by that, what do you think that they should focus on that would get them past that and start getting them improving and getting more accurate quickly?
I think it just be methodical. Just look at what's in front of you and measure it.
Perfect. That's a clean answer. Very straightforward. All right, well, let's move forward here a little bit to specifically stuff about a portraiture. So in a portrait bust, what has to be established early on for everything else to work?
Well, it's always the proportions that you do first, because otherwise you're having to change big things. You just want to make sure that your proportions and verticals. So, and especially for a portrait bust, you want to make sure that your neck is tilted forward. Your shoulders go to the back of the neck. And your eyes are where they belong on the face. You know, from halfway up to, usually the eyes are halfway up the skull. But people have slightly different proportions. Where the hairline is, just those big proportions, where the ears are. And also presumably across from each other on the head and perpendicular to, to where the nose is. You want to get that stuff. And also, as you're doing on this outline method of mine, you do want to check on those proportions. Just make sure you're not drifting. It's easy to drift. So you want to make sure you're not aiming your nose sideways as you look at it like this. You have a tendency, people. And you can even see it on Roman sculptures, where the face plane is not perpendicular to the side planes.
So advice of the day is proportions, 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 accuracy in those proportions.
Yeah, at first. And then once you get the proportions, then you get to play with rhythm and form and all the really fun stuff.
Exactly. Well, speaking about that and getting into refining that, for those who are, again, new to sculpture who may be here, what is the pinch pot approach and what are the biggest problems that students may run into, plus your best fixes for those?
Okay, I am not the best pinch potter, but ceramicists do pinch pots all the time. So they, not me, they would roll up a piece of clay and make it like a pinch pot in an orderly way. I usually take about that much clay and use the photographs to shape it. So that takes kind of discipline. I would recommend first learning really normal clay on an armature sculpting, because it's a little hard to just make something from the bottom up, which is what you have to do with a pinch pot. And so there are certainly ways to fix it. Like if you make something too big, you can take a slice out of it and put it together. And once you know what you're doing, it's actually, I think, faster and easier than clay on an armature, because you can put your hand inside the thing and pull it out, and you can smack it in. Whereas clay on an armature, you can only cut it off and add. Yeah, I mean, you can smack it to be a little bit in the beginning, but with a pinch pot, you have a little more flexibility to pull things out rather than having to add. So anyway, so I'll do about 4 inches, say, and then I'll let that firm up enough so that it can support the next 4 inches. And I try to put it in the correct shape using the photographs as best as I can. So one of the advantages of that approach also is a great and easier way to keep your symmetry correct. Make sure the ears are on opposite sides of the head, etc. Is that you can take a pinch pot bust and just lie it on its back. And then you don't have to, get down on the floor and look up to see. But you can turn the piece over at leather hard and sort of fix things that way. So I find it to be easier to handle And for carving also, when something's lying down, you can carve it like this, like I find the pinch pot method to be very amenable to form work. So, but ceramic world, they've been doing figure for a long time, but ceramicists tend to have a method and a sort of a formula, and they like to make things round because their entry into form is from pottery. So I am on a very low-key crusade to actually get ceramicists to learn figure in a play on armature way so that they can start making more complicated form, because the regular art world is just not into it. The regular art world, sculpture curators and whatnot, they do not care about your feelings expressed in form. They prefer assemblage, scanning, all this, up to the minute tech stuff. So if you're really have a feel for craft and hand wrought stuff, figurative technique is for you. And I encourage ceramics people to take it on.
I'm with you. I think that'd be great to see a lot more of that in the world, and then maybe people will start caring if it's everywhere. So I'm with you. When you're working from photos, how do you keep the sculpture true to the person and not the distortion from the camera?
You actually just put, if it looks a little distorted, you just have to bring your head really close and try to distort your own point of view. You just try to be the camera.
Great advice. All right, perfect. All right, so let's get into some more sculpture stuff here. How do you know when it's time to shift from building the structure into refining the surface?
I don't really do it that way because I have to, since I work from the bottom up, I start refining the stuff that I start refining as soon as it gets firm enough, up to a certain point. So, and I think that point is just where the form is correct. And then once the form is correct, then I sort of build as much as I can, and then I start really refining. It depends. If it's a very large piece, I have to finish the bottom before I move up, because I'm going to fire the bottom, because otherwise it'll crack. It can't support, leather hard clay can't really support the entire piece if that piece is over 3 feet tall or so.
Good to know. Well, in that regard, what does finished mean to you, and what are the signs that you're not quite there yet?
Finished is, like I said, it's when all of the curves of the outline are kind of aiming at each other, and they justify each other, and they have a certain rhythm that snaps into place and sort of resonates up and down. And of course, that has to be reconciled with with anatomical believability. So it's a matter of you just keep pushing the volume, divisions, and the outlines until they work together and they're not kind of contradicting each other.
Perfect.
It's,
That's wonderful.
so because sometimes if you do volumes too much, you might mess up the outline. Do the outlines too much, you might mess up the anatomy. And then you just go back and forth until it's all right. That's what takes the time.
Well, speaking of time, if time is limited, either due to the material or due to a show coming up or something like that, what do you think is a priority when finishing a piece up, and what should students kind of avoid spending time on?
If you don't have time to do a refined piece, I encourage you to only use a big tool, or only use your fingers, or only use something that is not very detailed, and do it as well as you possibly can with that. But don't try to get all picky in with anything. Like, just be, if you don't have enough time to do a finished looking piece, do a rougher looking piece, but just try to get what you've got to be good.
Perfect advice. I could not agree more. All right, well, let's talk a little bit about teaching, because since you've done a lot of teaching, a lot of critiquing in your time, how does your work change when you're teaching versus when you're alone in your own studio? Like, what do you simplify for students versus what do you allow yourself to explore privately?
Oh, well, I don't really, I can't really, it's not like teaching influences how I work, because those two things are not happening at the same time. But, and when I teach, I give a general lecture about outlines or volume divisions or whatever. But then I spend most of the class actually going one-on-one with the students. So I really teach at each student's level and I try to get students seeing the proportions well enough so that I can get them to the next phase, which is getting the outlines correct and starting to see the curves of the outlines. And then, classes are always really rushed. There's not enough time. And then the next thing I try to get them, then I'm like, okay, now it's time. You've got to subdivide this piece. I make them draw little circles of volume over the entire piece so that every bit of the sculpture knows what volume it belongs to. I have a certain kind of step, and so I take it very individually for the students. And sometimes I get students who, some students are more advanced than others. If someone really is advanced, I'll get into the nostrils, or the tear ducts, whatever's next. And the eyes, you want to get them looking at the eyes from back here, the most important point of view, to see, like, if you look at my eyes, no classical eyelids here. See, just everyone has a different relationship of their eyeball to the fat up here, for example, and you just make sure they're seeing all that stuff. There's like, until you hit Bernini, you can't, there's always deeper you can go. Every little fold, this little wrinkle here is a volume, actually, that stretches from here to there. And if someone wants to get that detailed, I'll show them where the volume of that is.
That's great. Well, speaking about that, what do you think is the most common misunderstanding that students have about detail in sculpture?
That they can do it by drawing it on the surface of the clay. You want to just do it with your tools. Or that they get so focused on detail that, like, for example, it's really easy, the hairline. They get so hung up on the hair that they dig into the skull, and like, the existence of the hair actually fractures the skull. So you have to keep in mind on the hierarchy of form. Hair does not dig into bone, neither does muscle. There's a hierarchy. Muscle sits on top of bone, and hair sits on top of skin, sits on top of muscle. Skin and wrinkles and folds sit on top of muscle, and hair sits on top of all that. So you can't dig down. You can't divide those volumes by going straight down. The tool has to be aimed at the underlying volume.
That's great advice. And I'm sure that's great advice for beginners. And when you're teaching those sorts of beginners, what's one idea that you repeat the most because it changes everything to how they understand sculpture?
Oh, it's always just stand there, work on the edge. You can't see how far. If you want to see how far your nose is sticking out, what do? Look at it from the side. And that's true of all these little forms. You have to find a way to look at them from the side to see how much they're sticking out.
Great advice as usual. So how do you teach students to self-correct that sort of thing when they don't have an instructor in the room with them?
He's got, sorry, the only thing I can do is nag. And what I do is I repeat the same things over and over again so that they develop this little horrible voice in their head. And it's like, so when they start to work from the front, they hear Judy saying, no working from the front. Actually, we do work from the front. What I have started to say, actually, the past few years, I've gotten a new technique to stop students from working from the front. I tell them if they see something from the front that they want to remember, they can draw it. So if you want to see how wide the nose is, draw the edges of the nose, draw where the eyes are. Don't try to sculpt from the front, but you can draw the proportions that you see from the front.
That's really interesting. I imagine that's actually probably great advice. Working, we talk about orthographics and stuff at New Message Academy, and I think that sort of thing just goes right along with that, in working from that. And I agree with your approach there. So what kind of practice plan would you give to a busy student who can only sculpt for maybe a few hours a week?
Oh, I don't think how one of the great things about sculpture and art in general is that you do not have to remember where you were. It is just sitting there waiting for you, just as you left it. So I wouldn't stress if you don't have a lot of time. You just pick up where you left off, keep your technique consistent, and you'll do fine.
Perfect, easy. What's the best way for students to use feedback without getting discouraged or overwhelmed?
You have the most important thing is that you have a goal and you realize that the feedback is there for you to use. You are hauling someone in front of your work and you want information from them. You're free to reject that information. I never know. I go around and do crits. I never know whether a student is going to use what I say or not because the 5 other teachers who may disagree with me have also given them crits. And the students, because they if they in their own mind know what they're trying to do, will pick and choose what they want to listen to. It's not that easy to know what you want to do. That's the real challenge of your studenthood, is to just know what you want to do. And that not everybody wants to be a professional artist and deal with the vagaries and the pretensions of the art world. Your goal may just be to really appreciate sunlight on a field. And you go for that. I have a student right now who his goal, he wants to do monumental sculpture. He has no interest in the art world at all. So I just tried to help him make compelling monumental sculpture. That involves, making clothing, is more time consuming than skin. I'll say that. It's got a lot more going on. So, you have to know what you want as an artist.
I think that's absolutely great advice, and I totally agree. You can't know where you're going unless you know where you're going. Um, And I think that's great advice just in general as an instructor too. I think you do a great job at meeting students where they are. And I think that's the mark of a great instructor in general. So if you could watch every student at New Masters Academy while they work, what's the one habit that you want for them to adopt immediately?
I think I just want them to have an open mind and see what's in front of them. That's really it. But I have a fetish about truth, whether it's appealing or not, whether it's beautiful or ugly. I find truth to be very compelling, and I try to pass that along to my students.
I'm with you there too. Absolutely. Well, that concludes all the questions that I had down for you. We do have, I think, a couple others here from the live chat. We had someone asking, I know you mentioned before that the clay that you normally use is no longer being made, which is really unfortunate. We had someone asking that Roma plastilina isn't suitable for their setup. Would you have any other recommendations for a clay or anything they could work with?
The plastiline clay is not something that that I have used much at all. So I love water clay because it starts out malleable and then it firms up. So when it's malleable, you can make the big shapes and get those done quickly. And when it firms up, you can make the details and make a really firm looking surface. You know, marble is very firm looking as a surface because it's hard. And clay can almost approximate that. The hardness of leather hard clay is similar almost to plaster. So carving it gives you a firm surface. So that's why I always use a water-based clay. Beyond that, you just have to see what feels good in your hands on the one hand, and if you carve, you have to try to find a clay that carves easily, because they don't all. Some of them are kind of resistant, and you just have to try it out. I'm not looking forward to that process, I have to say, because I'm about to look for a new clay myself.
I can imagine that's not going to be a very fun process at all, but good luck to you in checking those new clays out. Looks like we have another question here. When firing the bottom and then proceeding, are you calculating shrink, and how do you assemble from that point?
So my clay that I have been using does not shrink a lot, and I do look for low shrinkage clays. Number one. Number two, I only fire to bisque. And I think a lot of the shrinkage occurs between bisque and full fire. And also, a lot of shrinkage occurs from soft clay to leather hard clay, and I do have to account for that. I do make my pieces in soft clay maybe 10% bigger than I want the finished product to be. Because it started out, yeah, they started looking a little small. So, yeah. What else was the question?
Yeah, are you calculating for shrinkage, and then how do you start assembling after that point?
Yeah. So, I am trying to calculate for shrinkage, and also I'll have in a tall piece. I will cut the piece, let's say, in thirds, and I will do the finishing work pretty higher than 2/3. Then I will take that piece apart, fire the bottom third, and then that middle third is already the right size. Do you get that? So that's how I do it. I try to always have a transition piece that is calibrated against the fired piece already. So that said, it's not always perfect, and this is where my art restoration career comes in. I fill in the gap with plaster and recarve it so you can't see it. And then I paint. This is also, I remember, I'm not a ceramicist. I don't have to glaze. I can just hide the problem and paint over it.
Great solution. Awesome. Well, Judy, that's all we've got for you. And that's almost the hour anyway. I want to thank you so much for joining us here and spreading your knowledge and answering my questions. For those of you who are here watching, again, Judy's new course, Ceramic Portrait Sculpting, is available in full at your Masters Academy. It is a great course. I peeked at it quite a bit and it looks really interesting. It's very meaty. It's very, I'm not going to say entertaining, but it's very knowledgeable. It's very cool. So definitely everybody give that a look whenever you have a chance. Judy, thanks again for being here, and we'll see you again some other day. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. See you later.
Perfect.